When logger Marcus Chen pulled back the heavy canvas tarp hidden beneath decades of fallen branches, he never expected to find proof that two missing people had been living in the wilderness for years after everyone assumed they were dead. But let me take you back to where this incredible story really begins. October 15th, 2009. Richard Hale was finally getting the chance he'd been waiting for all year. His 12-year-old son Caleb had been begging to go on a real camping adventure, not just the backyard tent setup they usually did on weekends. Richard, a software engineer from Vancouver, had been working overtime for months, missing soccer games and school events. This trip to the remote Chilcotin Mountains in British Columbia was supposed to be their bonding time. "Dad, can we really stay out there for a whole week?" Caleb had asked, his eyes lighting up as they loaded the SUV with camping gear. "As long as you promise not to complain about the lack of video games," Richard laughed, ruffling his son's dark hair. Sarah Hale watched from the front porch as her husband and son drove away that crisp autumn morning. She'd wanted to come along, but someone had to stay home with their 8-year-old daughter Emma, who was fighting a nasty flu. The last thing she said to Richard was, "Call me when you get to the trailhead, okay?" That call never came. When Richard and Caleb failed to return on October 22nd as planned, Sarah contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The initial response was routine. Adults go missing in the wilderness all the time, usually turning up within 48 hours with stories of getting turned around or having car trouble. But Richard Hale wasn't the type to lose track of time or forget to check in. He was methodical, careful, the kind of person who triple-checked his GPS coordinates and always packed extra batteries for his satellite phone. The satellite phone that was somehow never turned on after they left Vancouver. The search began on October 24th with a small team of local search and rescue volunteers. They found Richard's blue Honda Pilot parked at the Pine Valley trailhead, exactly where he'd said it would be. The vehicle was locked, with no signs of disturbance. Inside, they discovered Sarah's goodbye note tucked into the sun visor and Caleb's backup inhaler in the glove compartment. "That inhaler was the first sign something was seriously wrong," said Janet Morrison, the search coordinator who led the initial efforts. Richard was obsessive about Caleb's asthma medication. He would never have left that behind intentionally. The search expanded rapidly. Within a week, over 200 volunteers were combing through dense forest, rocky creek beds, and steep mountain slopes. Helicopters circled overhead while tracking dogs followed scent trails that seemed to vanish into thin air. On November 1st, searchers made their first significant discovery. Caleb's distinctive red baseball cap was found hanging from a branch approximately 3 miles from the trailhead, along what appeared to be a well-used game trail. The cap showed no signs of damage or weathering, suggesting it had been placed there recently. "We thought we were finally getting somewhere," Morrison recalled. "The dogs picked up a strong scent from that location, and we were sure we'd find them within hours." But the trail went cold again. Despite expanding the search radius to over 50 square miles, no other trace of Richard and Caleb Hale was found. As October turned to November, and November became December, the harsh reality set in. The Chilcotin Mountains in winter are unforgiving. Temperatures regularly drop below -20 degrees Celsius, and snowfall can reach several feet in a matter of hours. Without proper winter gear and shelter, survival becomes nearly impossible. The official search was called off on December 15th, 2009, after 2 months and an estimated cost of over $300,000. Richard and Caleb Hale were presumed dead, victims of exposure in one of Canada's most unforgiving wilderness areas. But Sarah Hale refused to accept that conclusion. For Sarah, the absence of bodies meant the absence of closure. She mortgaged the family home to hire private investigators and fund independent search efforts. Every spring, as soon as the snow melted enough to allow access, she organized volunteer expeditions to areas the official search had missed. "I knew they were out there somewhere," Sarah said during a 2014 interview with CBC News. "A mother knows. I could feel it in my bones that they weren't gone, not completely. The private investigations uncovered several puzzling details that the official search had either missed or dismissed. Richard's credit cards and bank accounts showed no activity after October 15th, but there were several unconfirmed sightings of a man and boy matching their descriptions in remote areas throughout 2010 and 2011. A hunting guide named Tom Blackwood reported seeing two figures near Moose Lake in June 2010, approximately 15 miles from where the official search had focused. "The man waved at me from across the lake," Blackwood told investigators, "had a young kid with him. They disappeared into the trees before I could get close enough to talk to them." Another sighting came from a forestry worker in August 2011. Maria Santos was conducting a timber survey when she spotted what appeared to be a makeshift shelter in a clearing about 20 miles northeast of the original search area. "I called out, thinking maybe it was indigenous hunters, but nobody answered," Santos reported. "When I got closer, the shelter looked abandoned, but there were fresh ashes in a fire pit. Someone had been there recently." These reports kept Sarah's hope alive, but they also frustrated law enforcement. Each lead required resources to investigate, and each dead end brought criticism from taxpayers who felt too much money was being spent on a case that should be closed. By 2015, even Sarah's most dedicated supporters were beginning to suggest it was time to move on. Emma, now 16, was struggling in school and needed her mother's attention. The financial strain of funding search efforts was becoming unsustainable. "I started to wonder if I was being selfish," Sarah admitted years later. "Emma needed me, and I was spending every weekend in the mountains looking for ghosts." But just as Sarah was preparing to finally let go, the mountains revealed their first real secret. Marcus Chen had been logging in the Chilcotin region for over 20 years. He knew every creek, every ridge, every hidden valley where the old-growth firs grew thick enough to block out the sun. On the morning of September 8, 2024, he was working a remote section near Wolverine Creek, an area so isolated that most maps didn't even show the old logging road he used to access it. Chen was using his chainsaw to clear deadfall when he noticed something that didn't belong. Tucked beneath a massive fallen cedar, partially hidden by years of accumulated branches and forest debris, was a corner of weathered green canvas. "At first, I thought it might be garbage some camper left behind," Chen later told reporters, "but when I started pulling the branches away, I realized it was way too big to be trash." What Chen uncovered defied explanation. Stretched between several large trees was an elaborate shelter system that showed signs of long-term habitation. Multiple tarps had been carefully arranged to create a waterproof canopy over a cleared area roughly the size of a two-car garage. Beneath the canopy, Chen found the remnants of what could only be described as a survival homestead. There were raised sleeping platforms constructed from fallen logs and packed earth, a sophisticated fire pit with a stone chimney that vented through a gap in the canopy, food storage areas dug into the ground and lined with stones, even a primitive but effective rainwater collection system using tarps and improvised gutters. "Whoever built this knew what they were doing," said Dr. Amanda Price, a wilderness survival expert who was called in to examine the site. "This wasn't some desperate emergency shelter. This was a deliberate long-term living situation." But it was what Chen found inside one of the storage areas that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Wrapped in multiple layers of plastic bags and stored in a waterproof ammunition box was a leather-bound journal. On the first page, written in careful block letters, were the words, "Property of Richard Hale. If found, please contact Sarah Hale, Vancouver, BC." 15 years after they vanished, Richard and Caleb Hale had finally been found. Sort of. The journal contained 127 pages of entries spanning from October 2009 to August 2013. Written in Richard's meticulous engineer's handwriting, it documented not just their survival, but a gradual descent into something much darker and more mysterious than anyone had imagined. The first entries were practical and optimistic. October 18, 2009, Day 3. Caleb's asthma acting up, decided to make camp early. Found good shelter near creek. Weather turning cold, but we're prepared. Should be able to hike out tomorrow if Cal's breathing improves. October 20th, 2009, Day 5. Storm hit harder than expected. Tree fell across the trail we came in on. We'll have to find alternate route. Caleb, handling it well, actually seems excited about the adventure, teaching him to build proper fire, how to purify water, making this a real learning experience. October 25th, 2009, Day 10. Starting to worry. Satellite phone not getting signal, even from high ground. Tried 3 different ridges today. Caleb found what looks like old trail markers. Maybe we can follow them out. His breathing much better at this altitude. The early entries paint a picture of a father and son dealing with an unexpected but manageable situation. Richard's tone remained calm and problem-solving focused, even as their planned 3-day trip stretched into weeks. But by November, the entries began to change. November 8th, 2009, Day 24. Found strange clearing today. Perfect circle, maybe 50 feet across, no trees or undergrowth. Soil looks burned, but there's no sign of fire. Caleb says it feels wrong here. Kids got good instincts. Made camp 2 miles away instead. November 15th, 2009, Day 31. Saw lights again last night. Not aircraft, too low, too quiet. Caleb saw them too, moving in patterns that don't make sense. Tomorrow we're going to investigate the source. November 16th, 2009, Day 32. Found camp. Old camp. Really old. Stone foundations, metal implements that look hand-forged. No signs of recent use, but preserved perfectly, like time stopped. Caleb found carved symbols on trees nearby. I've never seen anything like them. The journal entries from December 2009 through early 2010 documented Richard and Caleb's adaptation to long-term wilderness survival. They learned to trap small game, identify edible plants, and construct increasingly sophisticated shelters. But interwoven with these practical observations were increasingly frequent references to strange phenomena. Richard wrote about finding more abandoned campsites, all showing the same peculiar preservation despite obvious age. He described hearing voices carried on the wind, calling names he didn't recognize. Most disturbing were his observations about Caleb's changing behavior. March 22nd, 2010, Day 158. Caleb spends hours staring into the forest. When I ask what he's looking at, he says he's listening. The mountains are trying to tell us something, Dad. I'm starting to think the isolation is affecting him more than I realized. May 14th, 2010, Day 211. Found Caleb standing at the edge of camp this morning, still in his pajamas, looking toward the ridge. Says he was sleepwalking, but his eyes were open. He knew exactly where he was. Said something was calling him. I'm scared. July 1st, 2010, Day 259. Caleb's not the same kid who came on this trip with me. He knows things about this place, about plants and animals and weather patterns that I never taught him. When I ask how he knows, he just smiles and says the mountains taught him. What kind of father am I if I can't protect my son from whatever this is? The summer 2010 entries revealed Richard's growing desperation to find a way home, even as Caleb seemed increasingly reluctant to leave their mountain refuge. By autumn 2010, Richard's journal entries took on an almost frantic quality. He had begun finding evidence of other people, recent evidence. September 30th, 2010, Day 350. Fresh footprints near the creek, adult size, bare feet, followed them for 2 miles before they disappeared on solid rock. Caleb says there are others like us, people who came to the mountains and never left. He talks about them like he's met them. October 15th, 2010, Day 365. 1 year. Sarah probably thinks we're dead. Maybe it's better that way. Caleb showed me another camp today. This one still occupied. I saw smoke from their fire, heard voices, but when we got close enough to make contact, Caleb stopped me. Said it wasn't time yet. What does that mean? December 3rd, 2010, Day 414. The dreams are getting stronger. Same dream every night, walking deeper into the mountains, following a path that glows in the moonlight. In the dream, I'm not afraid. I want to follow the path. When I wake up, I find myself at the edge of camp, fully dressed like I was about to leave. Caleb says the mountains are getting ready for us. Richard's 2011 entries documented his growing understanding that their situation was not unique. The Chilcotin Mountains, he discovered, had been claiming people for generations. Indigenous legends spoke of a hidden valley where lost souls found peace, but the price of that peace was never returning to the world below. March 8, 2011, Day 509. Met them today, the others, 3 families, 2 single men, 1 woman traveling alone. All came here planning short trips, all stayed when the mountains called. The oldest has been here since 1987. They have children born in the wilderness who have never seen civilization. They're not prisoners. They could leave any time. They just don't want to. April 20th, 2011, Day 552. Caleb asked me today if I miss home. The honest answer is no, not anymore. This place changes you, makes you understand things about life that you can't learn in the city. But I think about Sarah and Emma every day. They deserve to know what happened to us. June 30th, 2011, Day 622. The community wants us to go deeper, to the place they call the heart. Caleb is ready. I'm not sure I am. Once we go there, they say, we can never come back. Not even if we wanted to. The choice has to be made freely. The entries from late 2011 and early 2012 showed Richard wrestling with an impossible decision. Stay with his son in this strange mountain community where they had found peace and purpose, or find a way to return to a world that may no longer have room for who they had become. August 14th, 2012, Day 668. Caleb made his choice today. He's going to the heart with or without me. He's 16 now, not the scared 12-year-old who came here with me. The mountains have made him strong, wise in ways I don't understand. He says he can feel Emma and Sarah in his dreams, that they're safe and happy. He says they've let us go. September 2nd, 2012, Day 687. Watched my son walk into the forest this morning. He looked back once and smiled. Not sad, not afraid. Free. I understand now why the others never leave. This place doesn't trap you. It shows you who you really are. And sometimes, who you really are can't exist in the world you came from. September 3rd, 2012, Day 688. Going to follow him tomorrow. Before I do, I need to write this down for Sarah. We didn't die in the mountains. We found life here, real life, the kind of connection to the world and each other that modern life makes impossible. I know she'll never understand, but maybe someday Emma will. The final entry was dated August 30th, 2013, almost 4 years after their disappearance. This will be my last entry. Tomorrow I join Caleb and the others in the heart. I've spent a year living between 2 worlds, and it's time to choose. If someone finds this journal, please tell Sarah that we love her and Emma more than words can express. We didn't abandon them. We found where we belong. There's no sadness here, no regret, only peace. The mountains are calling, and I'm ready to answer. But the story wasn't over yet. When news of the journal's discovery broke, it sent shockwaves through the missing persons community. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police reopened the Hale case immediately, assigning a full investigative team to explore the implications of Richard's final writings. Detective Inspector Robert McDougall, who took lead on the reopened investigation, was initially skeptical of the journal's contents. My first thought was that we were dealing with someone's elaborate hoax, he admitted. The entries seemed too fantastical, too much like fiction. But forensic analysis confirmed that the journal was authentic. The handwriting matched samples provided by Sarah Hale, and carbon dating of the paper and ink supported the timeline described in the entries. More importantly, Details in the journal led investigators to discover additional evidence that corroborated Richard's account. Using the locations described in the journal, search teams found 5 more campsites scattered throughout the remote mountain region. Each showed signs of long-term habitation by multiple people. Personal items recovered from these sites matched missing persons reports dating back to the 1980s. At one site, investigators found a driver's license belonging to James Morrison, a hunting guide who had disappeared in 1994. At another, they discovered camping equipment registered to the Brennan family, Patricia, David, and their twin daughters, who had vanished during a hiking trip in 2003. "We started running these finds through missing persons databases," McDougall explained. "What we found was a pattern going back decades. People disappearing in this specific region of the Chilcotin Mountains, always during outdoor activities, always without a trace." The investigation expanded to include interviews with indigenous elders from the region, many of whom were not surprised by the discoveries. "Our grandparents told stories about the place you call Wolverine Creek," said Mary Blackfeather, an elder of the Chilcotin Nation. "They called it where the lost find home." People have been walking into those mountains and choosing to stay for as long as anyone can remember. It's not evil, it's just different from the life most people know. Based on coordinates found in Richard's journal, investigators used thermal imaging from aircraft to locate what appeared to be a substantial settlement deep in the mountains, approximately 30 miles from where the journal was discovered. The thermal signatures suggested dozens of people living in an organized community with permanent structures and cultivated land. On October 15, 2024, exactly 15 years after Richard and Caleb Hale disappeared, a joint team of RCMP officers, wilderness experts, and mental health professionals made contact with the mountain community. What they found defied all expectations. The settlement, built in a natural valley surrounded by steep ridges, housed 43 people ranging in age from infants to seniors. They had constructed permanent log buildings, established gardens and livestock pens, and created a completely self-sufficient society using a combination of traditional survival skills and modern ingenuity. Most remarkably, the community members were not being held against their will. They had organized their own government, established rules for newcomers, and maintained detailed records of everyone who had chosen to join them over the years. "They weren't victims," said Dr. Patricia Holbrook, the psychiatrist who accompanied the contact team. "They were people who had found something in the wilderness that they couldn't find in modern society. A sense of purpose, of belonging, of connection to the natural world that urban life had taken from them." The community leader, a woman named Jennifer Walsh who had disappeared during a solo camping trip in 1991, explained their philosophy to the investigation team. "We don't recruit people, and we don't keep anyone here who wants to leave. But modern life makes people sick in ways they don't understand. The stress, the isolation, the disconnection from nature and from each other. It's not how humans are meant to live. This place heals that sickness, but only if you're ready to let it." Among the community members were Richard and Caleb Hale. Richard, now 52, and Caleb, 27, were both healthy and appeared genuinely content with their mountain life. Richard had become the community's engineer and builder, using his technical skills to design water systems and sustainable structures. Caleb, who had grown into a tall, quiet young man, served as one of their primary hunters and trackers. Both men agreed to speak with the investigation team, and their account largely matched what Richard had written in his journal. They described a gradual process of adaptation to wilderness life, followed by a growing sense that they had found their true home in the mountains. "I know how this must look to people from outside," Richard told the investigators, "a father who chose to disappear with his son, leaving his wife and daughter behind. But it wasn't that simple. We didn't choose to leave them, we chose to become who we really are, and that meant we couldn't go back to pretending to be people we weren't." When asked if he wanted to see Sarah and Emma again, Richard's response was measured but firm. "I think about them every day. I love them more than I can express, but love doesn't always mean living together. Sometimes love means letting people find their own path, even if it leads away from you. Caleb's perspective was even more complex. Having spent his formative teenage years in the mountain community, he had no desire to return to mainstream society. That world down there isn't real. It's all artificial. The buildings, the schedules, the way people relate to each other. Up here, everything matters. Every choice has consequences. Every person has value. I wouldn't trade this life for anything. The investigation team offered both men the opportunity to return to Vancouver, to reconnect with Sarah and Emma, or at least to establish regular communication with the outside world. Both declined. When Sarah Hale learned that Richard and Caleb had been found alive, her initial reaction was overwhelming joy. Her 15-year nightmare was over. Her family was alive and safe. But when she learned the full truth of their situation, joy turned to confusion, anger, and ultimately, heartbreak. "They chose this," she said during a press conference announcing the discovery. "They chose to let me believe they were dead. They chose to let Emma grow up without her father and brother. I don't know how to forgive that." Despite her anger, Sarah requested permission to visit the mountain community to see Richard and Caleb for herself. After extensive negotiations with both the RCMP and the community leaders, she was granted a supervised visit in November 2024. The reunion was emotional, but strained. Richard and Caleb were genuinely happy to see Sarah and relieved to know she and Emma were well. But it quickly became clear that the gap between their worlds had grown too wide to bridge. "They're different people now," Sarah later told reporters, "not just older, fundamentally changed. The Richard the First married would never have made this choice. The Caleb I raised would never have stayed away from his sister for 15 years. Whoever these men are, they're not my husband and son anymore." Sarah spent 3 days in the mountain community, trying to understand what had drawn her family to this isolated life. Community members were welcoming and patient, explaining their philosophy and showing her the life they had built. But Sarah couldn't see past the choice they had made to abandon their previous life. On her final day in the mountains, Sarah had a private conversation with Richard that lasted several hours. Neither would discuss the details of their talk, but community members reported hearing Sarah crying for much of the night. When Sarah left the mountains, she carried with her a letter from Caleb to his sister Emma, now 23 and working as a teacher in Calgary. The letter, which Emma chose to keep private, was reportedly an attempt to explain his decision and express his love for the sister he had left behind. The discovery of the mountain community sent shockwaves through Canada and beyond. Media coverage was intense but divided. Some outlets portrayed the community as a cult or survivalist compound, while others depicted them as enlightened individuals who had rejected the toxicity of modern life. The legal implications were complex. While no crimes had been committed, the disappearances had resulted in massive search and rescue expenditures, insurance payouts, and emotional trauma for dozens of families. Several jurisdictions debated whether to pursue charges related to the costs of the failed search efforts. Mental health professionals were fascinated by the community's apparent success in creating a stable, sustainable society. Dr. Amanda Price, who had initially examined the campsite where Richard's journal was found, spent several weeks studying the community's social structure and psychological dynamics. "What they've accomplished is remarkable from a sociological standpoint," Dr. Price noted. "They've created a functioning society that meets all the basic human needs, physical, emotional, spiritual, without many of the stressors that plague modern communities. Mental illness, addiction, and violence are virtually non-existent among them." However, critics pointed out the darker implications of the community's existence. Family members of other disappeared individuals argued that their relatives had been manipulated or coerced into joining the group, even if the manipulation was subtle or psychological rather than physical. Marcus Chen, whose brother David had disappeared in the area in 2008, filed a lawsuit demanding access to the community to verify his well-being. "They say people choose to stay, but how can we know that's true if they're not allowed regular contact with the outside world?" she argued. The Canadian government found itself in an unprecedented situation. The mountain community was located on unceded indigenous territory, which complicated jurisdictional issues. Community members were Canadian citizens who appeared to be living voluntarily in their chosen location, making intervention difficult to justify legally. After extensive consultations with Indigenous leaders, federal authorities, and legal experts, the government developed a compromise approach. The mountain community would be allowed to continue existing, but with new requirements for oversight and communication. A permanent liaison office was established in Williams Lake, the nearest substantial town, staffed by social workers, medical professionals, and RCMP officers. Community members would be required to check in with the liaison office at least twice per year to verify their well-being and confirm their continued voluntary participation in the community. Any community member could request assistance leaving at any time, and children born in the community would be required to spend time in mainstream society upon reaching adulthood before making a permanent choice about where to live. The community accepted these requirements, recognizing them as reasonable compromises that allowed them to maintain their way of life while providing safeguards for individual rights. Jennifer Walsh, the community leader, addressed these changes in a statement to the media. "We've never been opposed to accountability. Our door has always been open to anyone who wanted to leave. These new requirements just formalize what was already our practice, ensuring that everyone here is making an informed, voluntary choice." Perhaps the most poignant aspect of the entire story was the position of Emma Hale, now a grown woman who had spent more than half her life believing her father and brother were dead. The revelation that they had been alive all along, living by choice in the mountains, devastated her. "I grieved for them," Emma said in her only public statement about the situation. "I went through therapy, I built a life around their absence, I learned to be okay with being an orphan. And now I find out they were never dead. They just didn't want to be part of our family anymore." Emma initially refused all contact with Richard and Caleb, returning Caleb's letter unopened. But as months passed and the initial shock faded, she began to reconsider her position. In March 2025, Emma made her own journey to the mountains, accompanied by a counselor and with the full support of the liaison office. Unlike her mother's visit, Emma spent 2 weeks with the community, participating in their daily activities and having extensive conversations with both her father and brother. The visit was transformative for Emma, though not in the way anyone expected. Rather than convincing her to join the community or reconciling her with her family's choices, the experience helped her understand that the people she had lost were truly gone, replaced by different people who happened to share their names and faces. "I made peace with my grief during those 2 weeks," Emma later wrote in a blog post about her experience. "Not because I got my family back, but because I finally accepted that the family I lost never really existed. The father and brother I remember were already changing when they left. Maybe they would have become different people even if they had stayed home. The mountains just made that change more dramatic and visible." Emma chose not to maintain regular contact with Richard and Caleb, but she didn't close the door entirely. "They know how to reach me if they ever want to come home," she said, "and I know where to find them if I ever need to say goodbye properly." Even with the discovery of the mountain community and the resolution of dozens of missing persons cases, larger questions remained unanswered. Why did this particular region of the Chilcotin Mountains seem to draw people who were searching for something missing from their lives? What was it about this place that made people choose to abandon everything they had known? Dr. James Whitehorse, an anthropologist who studied the community extensively, theorized that the mountains provided something that modern society had systematically eliminated: genuine connection to the natural world and to small group community dynamics that humans had evolved to thrive in. For most of human history, people lived in small, tight-knit communities where everyone had a clear role and purpose, Dr. Whitehorse explained. They were intimately connected to the natural cycles of the world around them. Modern life has separated us from both community and nature, creating a kind of spiritual malnutrition that many people don't even recognize they're experiencing. Others proposed more mystical explanations, drawing on indigenous teachings about sacred places and the spiritual power of certain landscapes. Mary Blackfeather, the Tsilcotan elder who had spoken about her people's traditional knowledge of the area, offered a different perspective. The land chooses who belongs to it. Not everyone who goes into those mountains is called to stay. But for some people, the mountains recognize something in them, a need, a searching, a readiness to live differently. The land provides what they need, but it also asks something in return. You have to be willing to become part of it, not just live on top of it. Scientific studies of the area revealed several unusual characteristics that might contribute to its psychological effects on visitors. The valley where the community was located had unique magnetic properties that affected compass readings and radio communications. The local ecosystem included several plant species known to have mild psychoactive effects when consumed regularly. The elevation and air pressure created physiological changes that could affect mood and perception. But even these scientific factors couldn't fully explain why so many people, over so many years, had made the radical choice to abandon their previous lives for an uncertain future in the wilderness. As of 2025, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police maintained an active investigation into the historical missing persons cases connected to the mountain community. While no criminal activity had been identified, the sheer number of disappearances, over 60 confirmed cases spanning 4 decades, raised questions about whether all the missing people had truly made free choices. Detective Inspector McDougall, who had led the reopened Hale investigation, was promoted to head a specialized unit focused on unusual missing persons cases throughout British Columbia. His team continued to identify potential connections to the mountain community, working to contact family members and determine whether other missing people might be living there voluntarily. The hardest part is helping families understand that finding their missing relatives alive doesn't necessarily mean getting them back, McDougall explained. In many cases, the people we've found don't want to be rescued from the lives they've chosen. That's incredibly difficult for families to accept. The liaison office in Williams Lake processed dozens of requests from families wanting to visit the mountain community or verify the status of relatives who might be living there. Not all of these requests were granted. The community maintained the right to refuse visitors who they felt might be disruptive or who couldn't accept the voluntary nature of their residents' presence. Some visits resulted in joyful reunions and ongoing communication between community members and their outside families. Others ended in heartbreak and permanent estrangement. A few resulted in family members choosing to join the community themselves, though this was rare and carefully managed to ensure the decision was truly voluntary. The Hale case became a landmark study in the psychology of voluntary disappearance and the limits of family obligation. Mental health professionals struggled with ethical questions about when, if ever, the desire for personal transformation justified abandoning family responsibilities. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, who had been part of the initial contact team, published a comprehensive study of the mountain community's psychological dynamics. Her research revealed that community members showed remarkably low levels of anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues compared to the general population. They've created an environment that meets fundamental human psychological needs that are often neglected in modern society, Dr. Holbrook wrote. Stable social relationships, meaningful work, connection to nature, clear purpose and role definition, and freedom from many of the artificial stressors of contemporary life. It's not surprising that people who find this environment don't want to leave. However, Dr. Holbrook also noted the psychological cost for family members left behind. The knowledge that someone you love chose to disappear from your life, chose to let you believe they were dead, creates a unique form of trauma. It's not just grief, it's rejection, abandonment, and betrayal all combined. That's incredibly difficult to process and heal from. Support groups formed in Vancouver, Calgary, and other cities for families affected by voluntary disappearances. Sarah Hale became an advocate for these families, helping others navigate the complex emotions and legal challenges that arose when missing persons were found alive but unwilling to return home. "You mourn twice," Sarah explained to group members. "First when they disappear, then when you find out they chose to leave you behind. The second mourning is harder because there's nowhere to put your anger and hurt. They're alive and well. They just don't want to be part of your life anymore." The Hale case attracted international media attention, with documentaries, books, and podcast series exploring every aspect of the story. Netflix announced a limited series based on the events, while several authors began work on both fiction and non-fiction books inspired by the mountain community. The media coverage was often sensationalized and inaccurate. Tabloid headlines screamed about wilderness cults and brainwashed families, while social media conspiracy theories suggested everything from government cover-ups to supernatural influences. The community members found themselves portrayed as everything from enlightened visionaries to dangerous extremists, depending on the outlet's perspective. Richard and Caleb Hale, in particular, became unwilling celebrities. Their decision to abandon their family sparked heated debates on talk shows and online forums about parental responsibility, individual freedom, and the obligations we owe to those who love us. "They've become symbols rather than people," observed Dr. Sarah Martinez, a media studies professor who analyzed the coverage. "Everyone projects their own feelings about family, responsibility, and modern life onto their story. The actual complexity of their situation gets lost in the need to make them either heroes or villains." The community leadership made the difficult decision to restrict media access after several journalists attempted to sneak into the settlement without permission. Future media interviews would only be granted through the Government Liaison Office, and community members were free to decline all requests. Jennifer Walsh addressed the media restrictions in a rare press conference. "We understand public curiosity about our way of life, but we're not a tourist attraction or a social experiment. We're people trying to live according to our values, and that requires a certain amount of privacy and respect." The revelation that many missing persons cases in the region were actually voluntary disappearances had a profound impact on search and rescue operations throughout British Columbia. Protocols were revised to include early screening for indicators that a disappearance might be voluntary rather than accidental. "We had to completely rethink our approach," said Janet Morrison, the search coordinator who had led the original Hale search in 2009. "When someone goes missing, we automatically assume they're in danger and need rescue. The mountain community forced us to consider that some people might be missing by choice." New guidelines required search teams to look for signs of intentional concealment and long-term preparation rather than just evidence of distress or accident. If indicators suggested a voluntary disappearance, resources would be allocated differently, with more emphasis on investigation than emergency rescue. The changes were controversial among some search and rescue volunteers who felt that any missing person deserved maximum effort regardless of the circumstances. But budget constraints and the emotional toll on volunteers made the revised approach necessary. "We can't treat every missing hiker like they might be the next Richard Hale," Morrison explained. "But we also can't ignore the possibility that someone who seems lost might actually be exactly where they want to be." One of the most complex aspects of the mountain community was the presence of children born there who had never experienced life in mainstream society. By 2025, there were 14 such children ranging in age from infants to teenagers. These children posed unique challenges for both the community and outside authorities. They were Canadian citizens entitled to education and health care, but they were being raised in an environment that rejected many of the fundamental assumptions of contemporary society. The community had established its own school system based on practical skills, traditional knowledge, and basic literacy and numeracy. Children learned hunting, farming, construction, and wilderness survival alongside reading, writing, and mathematics. They were fluent in English, but also spoke several indigenous languages taught by community members with traditional knowledge. The education these children receive is actually quite comprehensive in many ways, noted Dr. Rebecca Foster, an education specialist who assessed the community's teaching methods. They have skills and knowledge that most urban children lack entirely, but they're also missing exposure to technology, diverse cultural perspectives, and the kind of academic preparation that would allow them to pursue higher education if they chose. The government requirement that mountain-born children spend time in mainstream society before choosing their permanent home was designed to ensure they could make informed decisions about their future. The first child to reach adulthood under this new policy was 16-year-old Marcus Walsh, Jennifer Walsh's son, who had been born in the community in 2009. Marcus spent 6 months living with a host family in Vancouver, attending high school and experiencing urban life. The adjustment was difficult, but not traumatic. He excelled in outdoor education and environmental science classes, but struggled with the social dynamics of teenage life in the city. "Everything moves so fast down there," Marcus said after returning to the mountains. "People are always rushing somewhere, always worried about things that don't really matter." I liked some parts of it, the libraries, the museums, the food from different countries, but I missed the quiet, the connection to the land, the way everyone in our community knows and cares about each other. Marcus chose to return to the mountain community, but with a new perspective on both worlds. He became an advocate for maintaining connections between the community and the outside world, arguing that isolation wasn't necessary for preserving their way of life. Living off the grid in the Canadian wilderness required significant resources and careful planning. The mountain community had developed a complex economy based on sustainable practices, traditional skills, and limited interaction with the outside world. They grew most of their own food using permaculture techniques and maintained livestock, including goats, chickens, and rabbits. Hunting and fishing provided protein, while extensive food preservation and storage systems ensured survival through harsh winters. Some community members maintained remote employment relationships, working as freelance writers, consultants, or artists when weather and communications allowed. Others produced handcrafted goods, furniture, textiles, tools that were sold through intermediaries in nearby towns. The community also received occasional financial support from family members who understood and accepted their relatives' choices. These contributions were used primarily to purchase essential items that couldn't be produced locally: medical supplies, certain tools, and raw materials for construction projects. "We're not trying to return to the Stone Age," explained David Kim, a former accountant who managed the community's finances. "We use modern knowledge and selective technology to live more sustainably. Solar panels and water filtration systems, for example, allow us to have comfortable living conditions without depending on external infrastructure." The economic model was successful but fragile. A bad growing season, harsh winter, or medical emergency could strain resources to the breaking point. The community maintained emergency funds and had developed relationships with outside suppliers for crisis situations, but they remained vulnerable to external economic and environmental pressures. Scientists studying the mountain community were surprised to discover that their presence had actually improved local environmental conditions. Their sustainable practices and small population had allowed damaged areas to recover while maintaining healthy ecosystems. Dr. Marcus Chen, an ecologist who conducted a comprehensive environmental assessment, found that the community's farming and land management practices had increased biodiversity and soil health compared to the surrounding wilderness areas that showed signs of historical logging and mining activity. "They're living proof that humans can be a positive force in natural ecosystems," Dr. Chen reported. "Their approach combines traditional indigenous land management techniques with modern ecological knowledge to create a genuinely sustainable relationship with the environment. The community practiced rotational farming, maintained wildlife corridors, and carefully managed their water and waste systems to minimize environmental impact. Their carbon footprint was a fraction of what the same number of people would generate in urban settings. However, the environmental success raised uncomfortable questions about scalability. Could this model work for larger populations? What would happen if hundreds or thousands of people tried to live the same way in similar wilderness areas? Part of what makes their system work is its small scale and careful site selection, Dr. Chen acknowledged. This isn't a solution that could be replicated everywhere or by everyone. It's a specialized approach that works for specific people in specific circumstances. The Hale case set legal precedents in Canada around voluntary disappearances and alternative communities. Courts affirmed that adults may choose to vanish, even at great cost to their families, though they can be held liable for search and rescue expenses if they fail to notify authorities. The most contentious ruling involved Richard Hale's decision to take his minor son into the wilderness. Judge Patricia Morrison acknowledged it as parental kidnapping, but ruled that Caleb, now an adult, had the right to remain in the community he freely chose. The community also became a focus of psychological research. Dr. Amanda Price's 5-year study found members had lower rates of anxiety and depression and higher levels of purpose and satisfaction than urban or rural populations. The community's structure, clear roles, meaningful work, strong relationships, and connection to nature appeared to enhance well-being. Still, not everyone thrived. Some left due to isolation or missing aspects of modern life. The findings suggested that mental health is shaped not only by biology, but also by environment and lifestyle, with certain people flourishing in settings that match their psychological needs. The Hale disappearance evolved into a reflection on freedom, responsibility, and loss. Living on Silcotin land, the mountain community forged uneasy but growing ties with indigenous leaders, balancing respect with tension. In 2026, Emma Hale chose to spend a year with them, seeking to understand the choices her father and brother made. The case stopped being about heroes or villains and became a story of family, healing, and the cost of authenticity. The mountains offered no answers, only acceptance,